Hey everybody, welcome to another installment of Fearless Fridays on Facebook Live. So my apologies for being a little bit late coming on. I know the post had said that I would start at 3:15. However, we've been running around doing a bunch of workshops with some schools in the area, which has been great. But with the rainy weather, it means that start times are a little delayed. So hopefully we will have some of you join us live today. And if not, those of you who are catching on the replay, then thank you for joining us in the past. Or in the future. So for today's installment of Fearless Fridays, we are going to be delving into design thinking. And design thinking is something that is ingrained in basically all of the programs that we do here in STEM Minds. And it's basically a process that any sort of designers or engineers go through to really think about how their designs are being used effectively by others. And it allows you to kind of design effective products or effective solutions for a user's needs. So what we'll be doing today is I'll take you through a little bit of the design thinking process and the types of things that we use it for here at STEM Minds, give you some samples of how we would use it in our programs, and some examples of how you could use it if you're an educator or a workshop leader, or even just somebody who wants to try this at home. Some sample projects that you could do to kind of start into the world of design thinking. Okay, so let's get started. So when we think about design thinking, really at its core, all it is it's a process for creative problem solving that focuses on real needs to develop innovative solutions. And the key here is that emphasis on real needs. So when we use design thinking and creating something or developing some sort of solution, by focusing on those real needs, we're really starting to focus in on what is the problem at its core. So some of the samples that we give to kids is we always talk about the difference between a problem and a solution. So a lot of times when we're using design, if we just kind of jump right into the design stage, what we're identifying or the problem that we're identifying might actually be a solution, and we're not really looking at the problem as it really is. Okay? The beauty of design thinking is that you don't actually have to be a designer at all to use it. Because what design thinking does is it combines what is the desirable, so what is your kind of desirable outcome, with the possible to help you develop the best solution. So an example we usually give the kids in our workshop is, as cool as it would be to send a flying hippopotamus into space and make that civilian space travel, probably not really a possible solution right now. So if the problem that we're trying to solve is civilian space travel, what are possible solutions that we can look into and things that are feasible for us to design to actually create really innovative and effective solutions to that problem? And rooted at this core of design thinking, especially the way we use it here at STEM Minds, is this idea of empathy. Empathy is important for a couple of different reasons. So one, obviously, teaching kids how to be empathetic and just having them really understand what empathy is helps them to develop into our future kind of leaders and game changers in a more sort of social and holistic sense. So when kids start to develop the idea of empathy, or anyone really starts to focus on the idea of empathy, what they're doing is really starting to look at a problem at its core, or putting themselves in someone else's shoes. And this can be really helpful for design thinking because, again, when you're designing a product or service, you really have to do it from the user perspective. So you're not necessarily designing something that's solely for yourself. You're designing it for a user or a user group. And using empathy allows you to better have an understanding of what your user group is and how they think or how they act, which allows you to better take a look at your product and design it so it fits kind of that user's needs. So again, not only are we using empathy to teach kids about just the importance of empathy in everyday life, but it's getting them to think about design and think about what they're designing in a little bit of a different way. Some of the examples that we love to use in doing empathy and doing design thinking, and the beauty of design thinking is that it really can apply to anything. So you could do anything from using design thinking to solve the problem related to roasting marshmallows, which we have done. And we have also used it in case studies to do something a little bit more serious, like the idea of youth homelessness. And whether you're doing something with roasting marshmallows, or you're solving youth homelessness, or developing a product that's going to help help senior citizens. The empathy part that comes in is, again, putting yourself in that person's shoes. So if you're roasting a marshmallow, maybe you are a family or a young child. And so, for myself as a 20-year-old, 20-something-year-old, how am I going to kind of empathize or put myself in the shoes of that young child and really understand the experience that they go through of roasting a marshmallow to be able to better design something that's going to be more effective for them. And usually we do this through something called an empathy map. So we'll have students look at how are our users thinking and feeling. So what are some of their main concerns or their worries or their aspirations? What are some of the things that they might be hearing? So any sort of sounds that are going on around them, what their users might be seeing and what catches their eye. So this is an important thing that we emphasize with the kids too, is that, something that catches a 5-year-old's eye is going to look very different from something that might catch a 40-year-old's eye. As you learn, as you grow, just people individually too have different tastes, have different interests. So using that empathy piece really allows them to focus their design on things that are going to catch their user's eye, not necessarily something of their own. And then also, what are they saying and doing? And so by getting kids to think about what are they thinking and feeling, what are they hearing, what are they seeing, what are they doing, again, it allows them to really kind of have a deep understanding of what the situation is like from that person's perspective. And you could really use this in sort of any everyday life. If you want to do an activity like this with your kids at home, if you're a teacher and you wanted to implement it in your schools, you can do something like the empathy map and do this kind of empathy kind of case study activity and apply it not only to design thinking, but just to anything. In sort of going through that empathy map and trying to come up with a solution, you're kind of inherently looking at design and actually designing something for somebody else. So really, design thinking, there's lots of different iterations of design thinking. If you Google design thinking, there will probably be kind of quite a few options that come up, quite a few options of diagrams. And our version of design thinking is actually based on an engineering design thinking process with that empathy piece put in. So the important thing to think about of design thinking is that it's not a linear process, but a kind of cyclical or holistic process. And that's something that we emphasize for the kids too. That's really important as they are learning and creating, whether it's projects or prototypes or whatever they might be doing, but having them realize that it's okay to kind of jump back and forth, and it's okay to have new ideas and add your ideas into your design or into your project. And in fact, that's actually where the best learning and the best solutions come from. So empathy is really our core sort of element or our core stage in design thinking, and it's always that first step, so they're better prepared for the rest of the processes and the rest of the steps that they need to take in that process. So after you kind of empathize with your user, you identify your user, you identify their solutions, you identify the problems that they might be facing in that experience, you then need to sort of ask yourself some questions related to the problem that you're trying to solve. So you might ask yourself, what is the problem that I'm trying to solve? Who does this problem affect? What are the impacts of this problem? And again, this further allows you to get a better understanding of that experience of that user. So if we take the example of youth homelessness, I might be asking myself, the problem I'm trying to solve is youth homelessness. Who does this problem affect? It would be youth, it would be anyone. It could even extend to just anyone who is unfortunately without a home. And the impacts of that problem. And so the impacts of the problem are actually really a deep step, because not only is it the impacts of the problem to the user themselves, but if we're looking at something like homelessness, it not only impacts the user of who you're developing that solution to, but it extends further. And so using design thinking and kind of going through the steps in the process with kids, again, allows them to kind of further think about the world around them and how everything is interconnected. STEM itself is a very interconnected discipline, as I'm sure most of you know. Nothing really works in isolation, so it's never just like math is over here and art is over here. Everything is kind of intertwined. And so by asking them these questions and having them go through this process, it just kind of drives that point home and kind of further solidifies that for them. So once you've asked all your questions, the next stage is to start to imagine possible solutions. So you're asking your questions to kind of identify the actual problems and the problems at its core. And then the imagine stage is where you start to identify solutions to that problem. The best problem or the best solutions are often those that are simple, those that are original. So we kind of emphasize to kids, you want to make something that's original, you want to make something that's innovative, that hasn't, or come up with a solution that hasn't been done before. Because chances are, if it has been done before, then you probably don't really need to go through the process and actually design it, since it's already existing. But you can go off of someone else's idea and build upon that idea to continue to innovate. So we always love to use the example of the iPhone and kind of the idea of prototyping. So the first original iPhone is obviously not the exact model of iPhone that we have currently. And just kind of emphasizing to kids that you can take an original idea and kind of build upon it if you feel like there is a way to make it more efficient or bigger and better. And the most important thing in the imagine stage, especially when you're doing design thinking with young ones or kids, is the idea of no judgment. So the idea that there is no such thing as a silly idea. And this is probably just as critical to design thinking as the whole kind of rooted idea of empathy. Where the silliest of ideas can even have valuable and workable parts. So you don't really have to worry about, if my idea has necessarily been done before, if it is a silly idea, if it will work. Imagine stage is where you write everything down. And design thinking, if you kind of take that approach of no judgment, as soon as you start to add the idea in of like, oh no, that's a silly idea, or start to shut down ideas, then you're actually not really following through design thinking, and you're kind of doing yourself a disservice in this process. So an example of this is going back to the problem of youth homelessness. We were doing a workshop once with a group of high school students, and design thinking workshop. The problem we were using was to try and solve youth homelessness. And the students had come up with this idea, they're writing down their ideas. And one young gentleman had said, oh, I know, why don't we give them all a dog? Oh, no, that's a stupid idea. And so my colleague had prompted him a little bit further and said, okay, well, wait a minute. One, why did you say, we should give everybody a dog? And let's kind of see where that idea came from. Don't shut it down yet. So she asked him why he had suggested giving giving all these people a dog would be a solution. And his response to this was that when he feels really sad, and when he feels really lonely, what makes him feel better is actually going home and just spending some time with his dog. So knowing that he had someone there to kind of turn to and confide in. And he had said that, I imagine that people who are homeless or, youth that are homeless are actually pretty lonely being out there in the streets. So I thought what makes me feel less lonely is spending time with my dog. So I thought maybe that would be something that would help them, which if you think about it, that's actually a very deep understanding of the problem of youth homelessness. Something that he wouldn't necessarily have come to without having that silly idea first. So what they had actually kind of turned into is, although, it's not necessarily economically feasible to give every homeless youth a dog, and then there's, of course, other concerns about, how do you care for it, how do you get food for it, all that kind of stuff. From that idea, the solution that he came to is actually a volunteer-based service where volunteers would go out to the street, spend just 5 or 10 minutes a day just sitting and actually having a conversation with a homeless person. And that can kind of help them not to feel so lonely. So from what that student had initially identified as a silly idea actually came a very plausible and really great idea and a really deep understanding of the problem as it really is, which he wouldn't necessarily have come to if he had shut down that idea from the get-go. So after you do your imagine stage, the next stage, not final stage, is planning. So what we emphasize with kids is planning is that idea of prototyping, and that's where kind of the beauty of STEM learning and new technologies really helps out with design thinking. Is your prototype can be anything from a sketch on a sheet of paper to an actually full out built 3D project, or a little model using popsicle sticks. So there are tons and tons of options available there. And really what to emphasize in the plan is that this is where you start to identify any possible solutions before they actually come up. So you're teaching kids to kind of plan ahead, you're teaching kids how to organize their ideas, but you're also preparing them for what to do and how to kind of emotionally prepare if things don't go exactly the way that you want them to. Because as we know, chances are most of the times things don't go 100% perfectly right from the get-go, right from the start. So having kids kind of work through a plan and work through a prototype allows them to kind of have an understanding of, yeah, you know what, I do really need to, come up with a solution. And at least if I build my prototype and it falls apart, or, there's a component to it or a piece that isn't working, in my plan I've identified what I'm going to do as a kind of plan B, which allows them to kind of better deal with, you know what, yeah, okay, this didn't work so great, but that's okay. I'm going to pick up and move on from it and continue my plan or continue my ideas and evolve my ideas from there. After your planning stage is where you come up with your creation stage. So this is the part that is most fun for me and most fun for a lot of people, I think. And that's where you start to actually bring your idea to life. And so I know that students really love this, and I love it as a teacher, getting to actually watch the kids bring their ideas into something tangible. So again, whether that's a drawing on a sheet of paper, we've done it where kids are building little models using things like popsicle sticks or Play-Doh or things like that, which is pretty exciting because you get to kind of see their thought process, see the gears turning in their head, and kids really do feel that sense of pride of, I came up with this cool idea and now look, I have this actual tangible product of what I can do with it, and kind of move it on from there. So that's pretty awesome. Usually want to emphasize that when you're creating something, you want to try and come up with multiple versions, so that way you can kind of do user testing, you can have multiple versions again if something doesn't work exactly the way that you wanted to. You always want to kind of understand through that creation stage too if you have a better understanding of your problem after going through it. Have you modified your solution? Have you altered your plan? And really emphasize to whoever it is that you're showing design thinking to that this is all okay, and that this is really where the beauty of design thinking comes in and where that really deep learning comes in. And then, of course, through your creation, you really want to stay true to your vision. So you really want to, again, emphasize what is that problem that I'm trying to identify, who is it that I'm empathizing with, and when I'm creating it, keep those in the back of my mind so I can make sure that my solution is feasible and effective. And then the most important and what we call the final stage of our design thinking process is the improvement stage. So when we're looking to improve something, this is where that kind of self-feedback and that reflection process comes in. So especially in a school setting, design thinking is very valuable because of this stage, whereas we're really trying to get kids to think about, self-reflect and reflect on their work and always think about, what did I do well, what worked out not so well, what can I improve on better next time. And that again gets them to have a better understanding not only of how they learn and how they create, but how to kind of approach similar problems or similar challenges in the future. So I always want to emphasize what worked, what didn't work, and what's next. And the key in this improvement stage is feedback. So we always say here at STEM Minds, you want to seek feedback from people who know. So for example, if I was developing an app, I'm going to ask maybe someone who is a professional app developer, someone who is has very extensive knowledge in software development or app development, so that they can give me feedback on what my app is at its core. So maybe some of the user functions, if it functions properly, give me some of that insider technical knowledge. But I'm also going to ask people like my mom or my dad who use apps but don't necessarily know how to develop them. And they're also going to give me very, very valuable feedback from an actual user perspective. So whereas the app developer, software developer might be like, you know what, this, you really want to change your code over here. I think it would be better if, this bar would actually move to the bottom. It's a more user-friendly experience. Someone like my parents or my grandma or someone who isn't necessarily a professional app developer will be like, oh, well, I don't like those colors, or really quickly be able to tell me whether they like the app or not, even just by the amount of time that they use it. If I show it to someone who you can think of as like an average citizen, and they spend about 5 seconds on my app and then close out and never touch it again, that's giving me some pretty in-depth knowledge that I need to change something to make it a little bit more user-friendly. And then you also want to emphasize that you want to be open to changing and revising your plan or revising your design. So when giving feedback, you want to emphasize that it is not critical, it is not personal, but it's really just something that's going to help their design or their solution become bigger and better and more effective in the long run. So that's basically the design thinking process and kind of the steps that you take and the steps that we like to take. Again, this is not the only type of design thinking that there is. There are many different iterations. All are great. It just depends on which one, if you're using it, which one you are most comfortable with and which one you are most comfortable following. But some examples of how we use it in our programs here at STEM Minds is 2D and 3D design. So we actually start out our 2D and 3D design class or kind of sessions. The very first class is on design thinking. So we actually take them through a design thinking case study, usually the problem of roasting marshmallows, but sometimes we change it up. And we have the kids go through this process. And the reason why we have these kids go through this process is because, again, you know, whether they're designing, doing 3D prints, whether they're designing with the laser cutter, any sort of design that they do, they now have a much deeper and much more inherent understanding of how the whole entire design process works, and how to kind of change your design and how your design can change depending on what the end goal or end purpose of that is. So by starting with design thinking, when they're designing using for the 3D printer, then they can already sort of have that inherent knowledge of, okay, these are the steps that I need to take to make sure that I am doing everything I need to make sure that my design comes out the way that I want it to when using 3D printing technology, and how I'm going to use that same knowledge but modify it when you're using something with a laser cutter, so that, you know, you're using two different pieces of technology, but you're still using that design process to kind of figure out what that best solution is. Oftentimes with 3D printing, as some of you may know, is there's always a chance that things become spaghetti or there's something in your design that doesn't work quite right. So by going through this design thinking process also gives kids a tool to be able to be like, oh, okay, that didn't turn out the way that I thought it would, or, you know, my design looks different on the computer. How do I now go back, improve it, change it, and make my design, try it again so that my design kind of comes out with what I was envisioning in my head. We also use it in graphic design and web development, so another very kind of design-oriented course. We're about halfway through the course right now, and we've been focusing a lot on graphic design and just kind of elements of what makes good design and what makes things visually appealing, but we're now starting to move into web development. So we're doing design thinking, where web development, app development, game design, all very user-based kind of technologies and all very user-based softwares. So using something like design thinking, quite evidently, is really going to give them a good idea of what do I need to consider for my user and what do I need to consider for my website to make sure that it is user-friendly and make sure that it is something that people are easily able to understand, but also that they will want to use. So at the end of the day, when we're doing something like app development, web development, you're creating something for the purpose of other people to use it. You want other people to actually like your product and use your product as well. So that's where we're using web development, we use it in app development, we use it in game design, where we don't necessarily go through the design thinking process, but you can see how it's ingrained there. And even things like robotics and things like maker science or STEAM discovery programs, it's all ingrained. And that's the beauty of design thinking, is that even though there's a process to it, even though we go through a process of it, we do workshops on it, it is something that at its core, these steps of asking questions, improving the design, imagining solutions, are things that most of us actually already do when we're trying to either create a project or create a design. It's just something that we don't necessarily have a name to yet. And so if you're trying to do this with kids, that's something that you can emphasize, and something that we often emphasize too is that, it might seem scary at first of like, oh, there's all these steps and what if I'm not doing it right? But there's no necessarily right or wrong way to do design thinking, because chances are you've already kind of been going through this thought process, just maybe not as in depth. So that's basically design thinking at its core, some ideas of how we use it. Now we do still have some new programs that are opening up this next week. So we've had kind of the first sort of round of April programs. We have many that are opening up now starting this second week of April, and our summer camp coming up as well. So like I said, basically design thinking is ingrained in everything that we do. If you want your kids to get some exposure to design thinking, but you aren't really sure how to do it, we'd love to have them in our programs here. So you can go to www.stemminds.com, click on child registration, and browse some of our programs and things like that to see some of the cool things that they can do and how they can apply some of this knowledge. If you have any questions about whether it's about design thinking or just kind of things that you could do, some ideas of what you might want to do with your kids, feel free to post it in the comments below. We always love hearing what you have to say. or send us a message at info@stemminds.com, and we are always more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. So yeah, that's basically delving into design thinking. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hopefully most of you are going to have a great weekend and enjoy the April showers or avoid the April showers. And we will see you all again next Friday at 3 p.m. For another session of Fearless Fridays on Facebook Live. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and looking forward to seeing you again soon. Bye for now.